Recording. Scott McCrea, welcome to Suit Up the Podcast.
Hello, delighted to be here. I'm
And you have
actually looking
suited up.
forward to this because, from what I've seen from your previous podcasts and from your bio, that we like a lot of the same stuff. Pulps from the
Indeed.
30s and swashbucklers and thrillers and spy novels, and you're my kind of guy.
100%. When I was doing like prep for the interview, there were a couple of things. Number one, on your website, you talk about you like to write adventure stories. And that's just something that resonated because I feel like adventure stories, just like the point of the story is an adventure, isn't the typical thing that a lot of writers pursue today. If you don't mind my asking, what is it that kind of gave you this direction for an adventure stories?
Okay, well, before I answer that, I'm going to completely disrail your interview and tell
Okay.
you that just this week, me and my better half have read the best adventure novel we've read in a long time. And it's called One Man's Treasure by this guy named Terry Lahue. And
Awesome.
you didn't know I was going to do this, did you? So when you asked me to do this podcast, I started looking you up and I got this book and we both read it in a day.
Oh,
And I
awesome.
have to tell you that you really pulled off something kind of interesting here because you have the two brothers. And for those of you who haven't read it, first off, buy this book. But you have alternating chapters where the two brothers, who are very, very different types, are narrating the story. And that's a really hard gag to pull off. And you actually did it because if you could do it and you make them so different that they're cartoons that nobody believes it, but they're like brothers, but they're different enough. I thought you really pulled. This was a fun romp. It was kind of a romancing the stone book. I just want you to know I loved it. I thought it was terrific. It's a swashbuckler and an adventure story, and it's contemporary. So kudos to this guy Terry.
Thank you. It's definitely, I appreciate the compliments. I really loved writing that book. There's just something, it's like I said, adventure stories speak to me and they resonate. And I feel like there just aren't enough of them written. And I went, what is the story that 12-year-old Terrence wanted to write?
Okay. Well, now to answer your questions, why adventure stories? So when I was young Scott, as opposed to young Terry, I was absolutely obsessed with detective fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when Agatha Christie actually killed Poirot in Curtain,
Mm-hmm.
it's absolutely true. I wept like I was an inconsolable little girl. And I was the youngest member for a long time of the Mystery Writers of America. I thought that I was going to be, a detective story novelist because that's where
Mm-hmm.
my sweet spot intellectually was.
Yeah.
But then I also realized that to write those things, you have to be an intellectual, which I'm not. So I never wrote a, I never wrote a detective story. But I think my sweet spot is adventure stories of different types because of all genre fiction,
Mm-hmm.
it's the least limiting.
Yes.
So adventure stories encompass everything. It could be a historical novel, it could be a spy novel, it could be a swashbuckler, it could be a western. I've written a
Mm-hmm.
lot of those. So all cards are on the table for an adventure story because an adventure story is a question of pace and intent.
Mm-hmm.
And a detective story is a puzzle. And even a crime story is different, I think, from an adventure story
Yeah.
because they have a different vibe. So, adventure stories are my sweet spot, and they're the things I like to read the most now that I'm a grizzled old man. So,
It's funny you mentioned Agatha Christie because I feel like when I read the first Tommy and Tuppence novel was when, because my experience with Christie beforehand had just been the mysteries. And I didn't realize that she had a very prolific career writing these espionage thrillers. And just seeing the delineation she made between a mystery, you're solving the puzzle, whereas the thriller, it's propelling you through a series of events. You're not trying to solve what's happening, you're just trying to hang on until the end. And to your credit, let's start talking about it. Targets West, I think, is fantastic. And now that I'm talking about, it, I'm like, this really does have that in terms of like the concept to a certain degree, an Agatha Christie-esque flavor, which
Oh, really? Wow. Okay.
Considering it does make me think of that. Okay, it's Hitchcockian in a lot of ways, and I absolutely adored it. I posted my 5-star reviews. People check out Targets West. The cover for it is behind Scott. It's okay. You described it as James Garner as James Bond in an interview when I was doing the research, and I'm like, oh my goodness, that's so good. Because when I saw the cover, my very first thought was James Garner as Maverick.
Oh, I was at well. So I did not design the cover, but the good people at Down and Out Bucks did. But I did give them some feedback, and I wanted the Lucas Wheeler silhouette to look like a specific type of Westerner.
Hmm.
Um, and the genesis of the book is I've written a lot of Westerns, and I love writing Westerns. There's something honest about
Hmm.
Westerns, more honest in Westerns than really I think anything else. But I'm also a child of Ian Fleming. When I was
Hmm.
growing up, I loved Ian Fleming. I loved Sax Rohmer. God, do I love Sax Rohmer? Don't tell his wife. And Leslie Charteris.
Hmm.
These were my gods when I was growing up. And I always thought, what would Fleming have written had he been an American instead of a
Hmm.
Brit? And we think of Bond as sort of quintessentially English.
Hmm.
And what is a quintessential American hero? And that's obviously the cowboy. So how
Hmm.
would I write an Ian Fleming novel with the cowboy hero? And that's how I got a Targets West. So I mean, I tell people all the time, it's a James Bond novel with a cowboy in it. And it's gotten a lot of really solid advanced reviews, and thank you for your 5-star. So I'm very proud of it. They already are talking about a second. So
Yes. Okay, I'm very excited. This definitely has legs, and I want to see Lucas's adventures continue because you're right. I can't remember who it's. I mean, it's popular consciousness at this point, but the idea that the American myth is the cowboy, and I
mm,
think that there's a great series. The J.R. Sanders wrote the Nate Ross novels. They're
mm,
mysteries set in like the 1940s, but kind of the twist on the first one is that he's a detective solving a mystery on the set of a Western film. And it's at that era where a lot of the people are still cowboys. And there's just something fascinating about where that idea, the American myth of the cowboy, is something that resonates so strongly with us as Americans. So I was delighted to see how you use that because it's modern. It's set today,
mm.
but it feels timeless in the way the story is told. Like technology factors in a little bit, but you do a good job just keeping the pace up where we don't we sometimes have time to catch our breath, but not too much where we start saying, "Oh, but just make the phone call." You have a great scene where he's just trying to make a phone call, and that is honestly one of the best parts of the book.
Thank you. So the hero, Lucas Wheeler, is an American rancher from Wyoming. And I would think that ranching today is not significantly different than ranching during the era of the American West. So he's really sort of a timeless hero or a timeless American hero. And I like him a lot because, well, you've read him. He's he's slightly grouchy, perhaps.
Hmm.
And maybe a little high-handed, but he's also really sweet. And
Hmm.
and that's actually something that again I wanted to talk about. Your book, One Man's Treasure, is that there's an underlying sweetness there. And I think when we're writing adventure fiction or even
Hmm.
any pop fiction, that we've lost a sort of element of sweetness. And when I say
Hmm.
sweetness, I'm not talking about clawing
Yeah.
silliness, but a sort of warmth that you would
Hmm.
find when you were reading someone like Dickens, for example.
Yeah.
Not that this book is Dickensian, but I think adventure fiction has lost a sort of current of
Hmm.
sweetness that you would find in other works. I mean, certainly you would find sweetness in Leslie Charteris,
Hmm.
and believe it or not, even in the Conan Doyle stories,
Hmm.
there's a real affection there. So I just wanted to bring some of that back, and that's why I made a point of having Lucas have real friends in the book,
Hmm.
unlike Bond, who always seems sort of isolated. I mean, who's James Bond's friend, and
Hmm.
even more importantly, who would want to be James Bond's friend? I mean, No, like you had the opportunity to go out for a few with James Bond or Simon Templar. Who are you picking?
Oh, 100% Simon Templar. I am
Of
going to be
course.
drunk off my butt by the end of the night, but I know that Templar and I are going to have a great time. See, Bond would steal the girl, Templar would help you get the girl,
Oh yeah,
is just the difference.
entirely. Yes, that's the dynamic right there.
And I'm a big fan. I haven't read all the Charterists yet, but I went through like my Charterist phase.
Uh,
The the swashbuckling aspect. And again, I think that this is something that you capture really well, where we have the balance of the light and the serious. Because there's at least the one Saint book that I remember where his friend dies, and
yeah.
you feel that darkness and the frustration that the Saint has in that moment. But
Mm,
it only means something because you've seen him laugh in the face of danger and be like the jolly adventurer. And I think that again, something you've threaded the needle really well through Targets West, where we feel the seriousness and the gravity of everything, but we're also enjoying the adventure. And as grouchy as Lucas can be a bit, he's
mm.
still genuinely trying to just be a decent person. You see him like control his frustration and just, okay, we're going to make the best of it. And that's part of what makes him a good hero.
Um, Thank you. I don't know how to respond to that because it's actually very sweet. Thank you. I'll just take it as a thank you. Lucas was kind of interesting because my better half says that Lucas is me in a cowboy hat, which is funny
Aw.
because I wear cowboy hats all the time. By the way, I would like you to know that underneath all of this magnificence,
Mhm.
I have holes in my underwear.
Okay,
I
so
was getting dressed for this, and my honey said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm doing the adult podcast. You know, the one where I have to dress up."
well, you look fantastic. I always appreciate when I suit up when your profile picture, you actually have a pocket square, and I'm like, yes, this is how I know Scott and I. There it is. This is how I know Scott and I will have a good interview.
Oh, wait. So what's the derivation of suit up? Why suit up?
So when this podcast started, it was the idea of suit up philosophy. I'm a big fan of How I Met Your Mother, and Barney Stinson's like go-to line is suit up.
Okay.
And I had read a fantastic essay on the concept of there was one of those Wiley books like pop culture and philosophy. It was like How I Met Your
Okay.
Mother and philosophy. And there was a whole chapter on Barney's idea of suit up was this being philosophically. And I loved the concept. And then it kind of just evolved from talking about what does it mean to be prepared for every situation that you can to talking about stories and storytellers, because really that concept of the suit up is the moment where the hero makes their decision.
Mm.
And I mean, kind of with that, obviously, I'm stylish. I like to dress up well, as do you. You make a very specific style choice for Lucas where he has a very specific type of Stetson. I'm curious,
Yes.
how
The
did you
Stetson
make
Revenge.
that decision? Because there are a lot of great options out there for a good cowboy hat.
So a Stetson Revenger. I wish I had. So I have one right here, but I have to go into another room. That's the hat that I wear.
Oh,
So I'm
awesome.
embarrassed to say. So I like to dress well, like you,
Mhm.
and there is, I think, this misconception that if you dress like a Westerner, you're going to look like Gabby Hayes, and that's not the case. You can be very elegant. I love string ties.
Mhm.
I have some of those, and I love bolo ties, which I think look very stylish with the right jacket. And I think that there are Western hats that look just as good as fedoras, if not better.
Mhm.
And a Stetson Revenger, which is what Lucas wears, is sort of it's rather like a gambler hat,
Mhm.
but where instead of it has a telescope crown
Mhm.
and a band, usually rather ribbon, usually rather than a leather band. And instead of the brim curling upward with a pencil roll, it's just flat. And you know that's my hat of choice. So of course that's Lucas's hat of choice. And Lucas feels very much like a sadly kind of like I do feels very much like a displaced person in time.
Mhm.
I think Lucas really, in his heart, is somewhere in the American West, and I'm somewhere in the 19th century.
Hmm.
geography to yet be determined. But I'm definitely a displaced person in time. I mean, all of my cultural touchstones are my sweet spot is somewhere between 1880 and 1947. So
Hmm.
I haven't had. I'm now going to bare my soul. I haven't owned a television since 1987, which you can believe.
Congratulations.
So, and when I was working in public relations, people would say things like, did you see 30 something? I went all through my life without seeing Seinfeld until I was caring for an elderly relative. And I'm sitting there and I'm watching Seinfeld. And this gives you an idea of how out of touch I am because I'm talking about Seinfeld like it's new. And I was watching Seinfeld and I said, oh my God, it's a Jack Benny show, but not as funny. So,
Quote of the day.
one of the day, I didn't know. So I didn't know if I was going to write thrillers or comedies because my
Hmm.
my my first impulse was to write comedies, and under the name Bob Madison, I've written two comedies, which I'm
Hmm.
really proud of. One's called Cash and Carry by Bob
Hmm.
Madison. That is the single most offensive book in the entire world. So if you want to be offended, I please read Cash and Carry. And the other is a young adult book called Spiked
Hmm.
about two kids who meet their baseball hero who turns out to be an absolute douche. And he's just a rotten human being. And they're disillusioned. But yeah, I didn't know if I was going to write comedies or thrillers. I don't know how many drafts One Man's Treasure went through, for example, but there were a lot of drafts for Targets West. And at one point, I was thinking, I'll just make this a comedy because I just thought that there'd be a lot of funny things to do where you have a Western hero and a thriller. And I got
Hmm.
halfway through it and I said, that's going to be such a tightrope walk because,
Yeah.
even Bond himself at some point or sometimes goes or veers off into self parody.
Yeah.
And I'm sure
Roger
that
Moore.
people could have read it and yeah, oh, Moore's my favorite though. But and I'm sure people could have read it and said, I don't get this book. What's he trying to do? So I just and then I started all over again and it went through a couple of drafts before I was really happy with it. But by the time I was done with it, I was really happy with it. I will tell you a very funny story though. There's a gag in the book which I'm sure you remember where Lucas is getting off the train on his way to
Hmm.
the O2. And just as I had finished that, I had gone to a revival of North by Northwest, and I'm watching it, and then I'm like, oh my God, I stole a gag in that movie, and I didn't even know I had done it.
That's the best kind.
I didn't
But
even know. I'm like, oh my God, well, because I know that movie,
yeah,
and it didn't dawn on me for a moment that I had stolen it until I was like, oh God, I stole. Well, I'll keep it in anyway. It's too good.
I mean,
Yeah,
if you're going to
I'm gonna
always
steal
rip off
steal
the
from
best.
Hitchcock. Yeah,
Yes. Which again, I compared it earlier to Hitchcockian. I think that again, your story does a great job of keeping that North by Northwest feel where we're just moving. You're keeping the momentum throughout. And one thing I just want to call out because as someone who's traveled enough to have favorite and least favorite airports, the fact that we opened with Lucas on the plane just kind of grousing about there's no spot to put his hat. He
yes.
hates New York. He hates LaGuardia. I'm like, oh, I understand this.
Well, so I hate flying. I mean, I had to fly a lot back when I was in public relations because my main career was in public relations, where I wasted my life, I must tell you, writing about urge urinary incontinence. I mean, that's when you realize you wake up one morning and you say, I've wasted my life on this. I've just pissed it away. And um, I lived my entire life in New York until fairly recently. I'm now a California transplant. I love California.
Weather's
Um,
so much better.
Everything's better. The people are nicer. The places are cleaner. I'm not in LA. I'm in Southern California, in
Hmm.
Huntington Beach, beautiful town,
Hmm.
and I just hated New York. And when I got married, many years ago, our marriage contract actually was chiseled in a rock. It was a long time ago, and I said to my better half, I said, you know, I will marry you, but I really, really like to leave New York. And
Hmm.
he said, I promise we'll leave soon. And 26 years later, we did. So nobody in the world is more patient than I am.
That's how you stay married for 34 years.
Yeah, 35. Yeah. Wow. Patience. I know you're newly married. So the lesson here, Terrence, young Terrence, the lesson here is patience. Be patient.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh, and
one of
yes, dear. Yes, dear is good too.
Yes, so I am learning. It's definitely been, I'm a very independent person that kind of did their own thing and didn't like I don't question or have conversations about what I'm going to do. I just choose
But
exactly what I'm
that'll
going to
end.
do and do it. Exactly. It's
That'll end.
already starting to be a conversation point, and so I am learning. One of the qualities you give Lucas that I really enjoyed because writing a character, especially when they are someone who has more archetypal qualities, like the quintessential Western hero, it can sometimes get too close to parody, but you do a great job of making him feel like a real person, real today, not even real in the past. He has an interest in art. Where did that come from?
Ah, actually, one of the initial drafts, there was an even more or bigger interest in art. I love art, and I'm a very, very, very amateur painter. And I used to work for a museum that specialized in 19th century academic art, which is
Oh,
actually kind
cool.
of my sweet spot. And I wanted, so how do you make a Western hero sensitive and keep him masculine?
Hmm.
And, or more importantly, not sensitive. How do you make him cultured and keep him
Yes.
masculine?
Hmm.
And at least here in the states, being cultured is coded as either being gay or being villainous.
Hmm.
I mean,
I mean,
if you want
in
to make a villain,
Fleming,
you make him Clifton Webb or George Sanders.
yeah.
You don't make him Brennan. So my first thought was I would have him collect Remington bronzes
Hmm.
because Frederick Remington, the great American Western artist, not only was a painter but a sculptor, and he had these wonderful bronzes. And I thought, well I love your cup,
Hmm.
and I'm like, that's. And then I thought, well, that's so easy. I mean, that would be, I mean, that's cheating, you know? So I just made him, really interested in art, kind of like there's so much Lucas, there's so much of me in Lucas, actually. So Lucas likes painting and so do I. And that's it. If I was a Westerner and capable and intelligent and rich, I'd be Lucas.
Hmm.
But I'm none of those things. So I'm just making it up.
I would argue the capable thing you definitely are, especially with the written word.
Well, okay, yeah, but
Because,
I'm not gonna ride horses or break up international plots. Or I'm actually so I'm kind of proud also
hmm.
about his detective abilities, because
Hmm.
when he's in the Sheik's palace, he's able to figure out what's going on.
Hmm.
And
Okay, can I
I
just
was kind of proud.
plant on that real quick? Him in the Sheik's palace. I don't want to give anything away in the book. I'm just gonna say that was so deliciously Fleming in the way that you have it set up, and then the whole set piece, incredibly imaginative, and I loved it. I literally was sitting there reading the book, just going, "Oh, this is so good. I'm enjoying this so much. I'm so happy to be reading this." Which, I mean, I love books, and so I like when I get to read really good, enjoyable ones. So thank you again.
Oh, you're making me blush, actually. So I'll tell you where that came from. When I was growing up in New York and a little kid, in New Jersey, there was this place called Wild West City in Netcong, New Jersey. It was about 40 minutes outside of the city. And it was a recreation of an old West town. There you are in the wilds of New Jersey. And you would go, and they had people dressed up like Westerners, and they would stage gunfights and everything. And as the villain, who's a Saudi Arabian sheik, is also obsessed with the American West. And I figured, well, if I was going to do that and I was a Saudi Arabian sheik, what would I do? And I'm like, oh, I would have my own Wild West town in the middle of the desert. Of course, with animatronic figures, because it's cheaper than paying people to dress up every day. And so that's where that came from. And honestly, um, there is so we were talking about Roger Moore before. Moore is my favorite Bond,
Hmm.
simply because he's the only Bond that I would want to know. The others I don't
Yes.
want to know. Any of them. Yeah.
Oh, Roger
Yeah.
Moore was such a it for me as a Bond fan, I'm always conflicted about the Roger Moore era because he as a person, and I think just on screen might be one of my favorite portrayals. Not necessarily because he's James Bond, because Roger Moore is just such a delightful personality.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I think For Your Eyes Only might be one of my top 10 Bond films.
Ah, okay. But in what I think is
Hmm.
probably his weakest film is The Man with the Golden Gun. So
Mm,
I mean, none of it really works. It's just, but there's that bit with Scaramanga's shooting
yes.
gallery,
Hmm.
and I always thought, well, if somebody had done that better, it would really have worked. And so that's where that came from in Target's West. I'm like, I'm going to improve on this failed idea and make it better. So that's where that bit came from. But so what are your top 10 Bond films?
Oh, that's really
Top five, top five,
top
top five.
five. Top five would be From Russia with Love and or Casino Royale. They switch one and two.
I assume you don't mean the 67 Casino
No,
Royale.
the one with Daniel Craig
Uh,
and The Living Daylights,
Daylights.
License
Wow,
to
interesting.
Kill,
Okay.
and uh, I was recently on a podcast. Someone else asked me, and that always gets difficult because trying to. I would probably rate. It's always that fifth one that's a little difficult. I would definitely say that
I
Doctor
love
No,
this. You're,
actually,
you're, you're, you're suffering over this. This is
Doctor
great.
No might be in there. I think
Okay.
that Doctor No, even though it feels the most different because it's the oldest of the films, so it still has very much the flavors of that period. I would say fun thing about watching the Bond series is watching film change in a lot of senses. But I think that it's just a really tight movie. What
It
about
is.
you? What are your top five Bond films?
Well, I'll tell
Because
you, and then after that, I want to say something about Doctor No. So my first favorite. So this is not a question of quality; it's a question of
hmm
which are my favorite.
hmm
Because clearly the best film in the series is From Russia with Love.
yes.
Yeah, I don't think they've topped that. My favorite is Octopussy, of course.
hmm
Just so I can hear Louis Jourdan say Octopussy,
yes.
Octopussy, Octopussy. And it's got, and that was, the first draft of that was written by George MacDonald Fraser, who wrote the
Oh,
Flashman books.
oh, I
And you
didn't
could
know
see
that.
his fingerprints all over it. I mean, it has that sort of
Yes.
international sweep. And I think Fraser was, the great historical novelist of the 20th century. And maybe, bite my tongue, maybe even the great comic novelist of the 20th century. He didn't have Woodhouse's gift for language, but Woodhouse wrote the same book 90 times.
hmm
And he wrote it beautifully. But I think I think Fraser's books are all different. So top five: Octopussy, From Russia with Love, Spy Who Loved Me, of
hmm
course. Um, that's three. Very unpopular opinion. I love Die Another Day.
Okay, I will say Die Another Day is one of my favorite like guilty pleasure watches
Uh,
where I did a drink along watch for my birthday like 2 years ago, and it was one of
we
the
have to
most
know each other
amazing
better because this
experiences
will
of
be
my
fun.
life.
When were you drinking? When he
We were drinking alternating between whiskey and seltzer.
no, but what was making you? What was
Oh,
the
so there's a
trigger?
whole contest like game rules, and it's like anytime he says Bond, James Bond, anytime there's an
Uh,
innuendo, anytime, which in that movie there's a lot of innuendo. Um,
they were so horny when they wrote that movie.
oh my goodness, it was amazing. I can't remember. Those were like the big ones, and I was very
So I love it because it has the sword fight,
the
and you
sword
would have
fight's so
thought
good.
it's wonderful because they go from type of sword to type of sword to type of sword, and it has this great sort of logical progression,
Mhm.
and you learn a lot about the characters as they fight and how they fight.
Mhm.
And it escalates from type of weapon to type, and I love it to
I think
pieces.
Toby
And I would,
Stevens is an underrated villain too for the Bond franchise.
I think he's great because he's the man who wants to be James Bond. I mean,
Hmm
who's your worst nightmare? The guy who's just like you. And then, believe it or not, Live and Let Die. I think Live and Let Die is
It's
just
really good.
fabulous. I just
Uh,
love that.
I heard someone say that every Bond's like first scene says everything you need to know about who they're going to be in the series. And Roger Moore trying to hide a girl from his boss as the first scene of him as Bond says everything you need to know about the rest of his tenure as Bond.
Yeah. So you were talking about Dr. No. A couple of years ago, I'd written a book, or I co-wrote a book called "It Came From," which
Hmm.
was about the literary antecedents of famous movies, mostly horror and
Ooh.
science fiction movies. And I wrote a lot about Dr. No. And as you know, Dr. No, the novel, which I'm sure you're familiar with, it's just sort of like Ian Fleming writing a sex romance novel. I mean, this is his
Hmm.
Fu Manchu book. And
Yes.
as you remember, Dr. No in the book is very different from Dr. No in the movie. He has pincers instead of hands, and he doesn't blink, and he's completely bald. And at one point, he's always draped in these flowing yellow oriental robes. And Bond is convinced that he's like a slug underneath, and there should be a trail of slime behind him. I mean, the whole thing is just it's so sexual. And the road from book to movie was very, very, very long. And there
Hmm.
were, everybody in the whole world was, touted for this. And at one point, they were thinking about. And I just love this. I mean, if you close your eyes and think of an alternate reality, it would have been James Mason as Bond and Basil Rathbone as Dr.
Hmm.
No. The problem with that is that it would have been the end of an era, I think, as opposed to the beginning of an era. But
Yes.
what an end of an era that would have been. With Tony Dr. No, the stealing NATO missiles compensate for the loss of your hands. I mean, it would just, we'd be talking about it now, even if they had only done one. It's
Hmm.
a great, it's a missed opportunity, I think. Who do you think should have been a Bond villain that never was?
Anthony Hopkins, 100%.
Yeah, really?
So he was in Tomorrow Never Dies. He is
Anthony
supposed
Hopkins is in Tomorrow Never
he
Dies?
was supposed to
Oh, supposed
be.
to be. Okay.
And basically, he walked on set and then walked off set like 2 days later because they kept rewriting the script. And he was like, "I'm done. I can't do this. I'm whatever the fine is. I'm leaving. It's a mess of a production." But I've always thought he has just seen him in Westworld, especially like this last year. Imagine an Anthony Hopkins fresh off of Silence of the Lambs playing a Bond villain.
Okay.
How about
Um,
you? Basil Rathbone would have been an
that's
amazing
what I
Bond
would have
villain.
been.
But then
I,
again, Basil
I,
Rathbone would have been amazing in anything. I love like the Captain Blood and him playing against Errol Flynn in anything was always gold.
have you ever thought that at, um, Patrick Stewart's career is
Mm.
what Basil Rathbone should have had?
Oh,
I mean, think about
wow.
it. Patrick Stewart is our contemporary Basil Rathbone. I mean, without the athleticism. I mean, because he does the classics, he does these
Hmm.
junk movies, and he's a real actor, and he has a commanding presence. Stewart's not going to end up in Hillbillies in the Haunted House the way Rathbone did. But Rathbone was one of those. When I was writing the villain Kashif, oddly enough, I was thinking of Rathbone when I was doing that.
I
So
can see that.
yeah, Rathbone was one of those formative personalities on my tender psyche, because good heavens, I mean, there was nothing he couldn't do. There was a long period in late grade school where I tried to sound like him, and I
Hmm.
just looked and sounded ridiculous because there's nothing worse than an 8-year-old American kid trying to sound like Basil Rathbone, and I would do things like have breathy W's, like whipped. Mom, have you whipped up some eggs? And she would look at me and say, calm down. So there was a lot of calm down. I was going, calm down. So,
Okay, so I
oh,
want to
yes.
transition the conversation a little bit here because
I'm
you've
sorry.
also written the Jeff Gallion series.
Ah,
And I just tell me a little bit about where this started, what it's about, because these are also adventure stories.
So Jeff Gallion. So those are my Charters books. So I've written two Jeff Gallion books. I'm an ex New Yorker, as I told you. I moved to California. It was a huge culture shock because I do live on the beach. If
Hmm.
I step out of my back door actually, and walk 4 minutes, I'm in the ocean up to my knees. That's how
Oh,
close
that's
I am.
awesome.
Yes, and I had never. I mean, look at me. I tan when I open up the refrigerator. You know that. So I had not spent a lot of time on the beach, and I used to see all these beach guys, and I'm like, what is their interior life, if any? And then I was thinking, well, if I was a beach guy, I wouldn't need interior life because who cares? I had it all. so, um, so I wanted to write an adventure novel in the vein of Charters, which is why there's actually a Charters University, as you know, in there.
I noticed that.
Yeah. So Jeff Gallion is a genius speech bum. That was the premise. So he is absolutely jaw-droppingly brilliant, and he's big and blonde and hunky in that sort of Beach Boy way, and he's also a terrible drunk and a wastrel, and he can't keep a job, and so he's a bum. He's literally a beach bum, and they keep on pegging him for these assignments because of his knowledge base and his capabilities. So you have this guy who's a beach bum and kind of a doofus while being brilliant in all of these great adventure scenarios. And I just thought the idea of putting a beach bum in an adventure novel was kind of cool. In 20 Chests of Gold, that's a treasure chest book, kind of like One Man's Treasure. And I had that wonderful bit where he escapes from a burning bar by surfing down the banister because like because he's a beach bum, of course, and he spends a lot of time swimming. I had so much fun writing that book because every time I wanted, when you write an adventure novel, your
Hmm.
first impulse is, let's make this guy capable, and let's make this guy.
Hmm.
So I always had him throwing up because he's hungover. How do I introduce this great? I got it. The guy comes to tell him his assignment while he's hovering over the loo, throwing up because of the night before. And they're just sort of like propping him up, and he's completely stiff. So, so I think they're pretty funny, and I like them a lot. That one goes. God, I don't remember. That goes from New York. No, it goes from California to New York to
Hmm.
a Caribbean island, right?
Yes, I believe so. It's been a hot minute since I read it, but
Okay.
I did enjoy it. I need to get
And
the
the
next one too.
second one is called. I love this. It's called Jewels of the Feathered Serpent, and this is my Republic serial knockoff book. So he actually
Ooh.
finds a lost civilization in the American Badlands. He goes underground, and there's underground Aztec pyramids, and I loved it. I had a lot of fun doing those. I'll do another, I think.
Oh, good. Okay, so this brings up another comment that I had seen in a previous interview. You had said that you really enjoy writing series because you do, A, you're a very prolific author, and B, you have written multiple series and continue to write these series. What attracts you to writing series instead of standalones?
So if you're a serious literary artist, you're writing standalone novels. I am neither serious, literary, nor an artist. I'm an entertainer. I want people to have fun.
Hmm.
And I think if you're writing serious novels, you have your opportunities for an audience are limited.
Hmm.
And I want an audience. I mean, I never understood people who say, I wrote this book for myself. I mean, if you wrote this book for yourself, don't bother. Just close your eyes and imagine it, right? Um, so I write to be read.
Hmm.
And a series book, and you obviously looking at your bookcase are a guy who's read a lot of series books. Um, there's a they're comfortable in a way that standalone novels are not.
Hmm.
There are literary critics who go, Like, why would I read all of the James Bond novels? Just give me the one where it's the best. I'm like, that misses the point entirely.
Hmm.
You're a series novel is visiting with people you like.
Hmm.
Series novels are friendships,
Hmm.
and it's building friendships with people you like or people who you're interested in.
Hmm.
And I could honestly tell you, if you had gone to 8-year-old Scott, I would have said, Sherlock Holmes is my best friend.
Hmm.
And probably 13-year-old Scott would have said James Bond is my best friend. So I write about my friends, and I know seriously, and I want people to think of them as friends,
Yeah.
and that's why series novels are my sweet spots because I want people to connect to the books, and the best way to do that is to write about people that they want to see more than
Hmm.
once.
That is a great way of looking at it. I remember reading once that it might have even been the mystery. I have like the Mystery Writers of America's uh collection on like essays from members on like what makes a good mystery. And I
Ah,
think it was
okay.
in one of them that they made the comment that a detective story, just as like an example, but I think it translates to across fiction in general, you can get a mystery, but you won't care about unless you like the person you're with. And
Yeah.
so having a character that you want to commit to reading about and with for multiple pages and multiple installments makes the difference. And again, I think that's what you've done really well with Jeff Gallion. That's what you've done really well with Lucas Wheeler. And I haven't read all of your Westerns, but I'm going to go on a limb and say that's what you've done with them too, is
Oh,
creating
awesome.
characters that people want to be with.
So I wrote a series of books about Tom Mix.
Okay,
That was
do
my first book
tell.
series, and the initial plan was it'd be a series of books about Tom in different points of his life. When
Hmm.
he was a young marshal, which is mostly hokum, but I mean, when he was a young marshal, and then when he was a big movie star, and then when he was, doing the Tom Mix circus near the end of his life. And it turned out that I didn't do any of that. I just kept where he was a marshal in 1910 in the whole sort of feeling of it was the end of the West, the beginning of the modern world, and you knew that Tom was
Hmm.
actually going to end up being in the movies. And here you are, here he is in the Old West, and those are really sweet books.
Hmm.
They're one of them actually was a finalist for the Western Writers for America Spur Award. I'm really proud of that.
That's
It's the first award
awesome.
I ever got nominated for, and he has this sort of coterie of characters around him. A drunken newspaperman who's based on Henry Hull, who's a name from the past, and he has a deputy who's kind of a doofus, and they're just really nice, fun books. What I liked about that, and going back to a series book, is that each and every one of the Tom Mix books is different. So the first
Hmm.
one is a murder mystery, and the
Hmm.
second one is an adventure involving a hot air balloon. And the
Ooh.
third, yeah, and then the third one is a grim revenge tale,
Ooh.
and it's a really grim revenge tale. And then there's another one that's sort of a caper. So it's like I have the core group of people that are there.
Hmm.
It's like episodic television, and you're trying to keep it interesting.
Yeah.
And my current series right now is about a marshal named Ezra Flint,
Hmm.
um, who is a stoic. He's literally a stoic. His idea of a good time is reading Marcus Aurelius and
Oh,
drinking unboiled water. And
I love this.
okay, and
I'm
he's
a big
very
fan of the Stoics, so
I didn't know this. And he's very flinty, and everything is filtered through. What would Marcus Aurelius do? And he's very standoffish, and life is sort of around him, and he's always trying to make the best decision. But there's also this internal warmth there, where
hmm.
it's important. Kids always instinctively like Flint, which tells you everything you need to know. So a new one just came out called Flint Revenge, which is, of course, a grim revenge tale. I love grim revenge tales. Have you ever considered revenge?
I'm a actually yes. So my favorite book of all time is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. And so revenge as just this concept, the idea of the elegant retribution, of
Hmm.
vengeance, just has this inherent appeal. Have you ever seen? There's
Have you
a
ever? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no. Go ahead.
Have you ever realized like all of Batman and
Hmm.
Zorro just all goes back to the Count of Monte Cristo, which is this incredibly dense
Yes.
and rewarding book. And it has the lesbian character
Hmm.
and Christianity and redemption and it's so rich, it's so thick.
Hmm.
You could actually, if you only read one book and you make a Count of Monte Cristo, you could keep going back to it, every couple of months and find something new. It's a remarkable book.
I have read it about once a year ish,
Wow.
once every 18 months or so since 20, probably since 2016. And wow, it's
Wow.
been nearly 10 years. But every time, like, it's also my wife's favorite book. Like, weirdly
Oh,
enough, that was
really?
one of the first things we bonded over. And we read it together, like got the audiobook and rereading it this last go round, I saw things that I'd never seen before. And I was like, it's just amazing how you can go through a book so many times and still find things that are rewarding it. Talking about the Stoics, there's a quote by Heract Heraclitus, one of those
Mhm.
names. Basically, no man steps into the same river twice, for the river is not the same, nor is the man. And I think that that's part of what good fiction is you come to it with a new fresh face, a new psyche. And the book has changed a little bit too because of that. The talking about revisions in writing, as you well know, it's been interesting because now I'm on. So One Man's Treasure is my third book. If I reread it now, I see, oh, I love the book still. But I go, oh, these are the things I might slightly change because I, as a writer, have written stuff since. Do you ever feel that with revisiting any of your own fiction, going, okay, I can see the distance of where I've grown or changed?
Um, I can answer that, but first, one thing I noticed about One Man's Treasure is, and it's not a criticism, is that it's a young man's book.
Hmm. Yes.
I read that and I said, this is it's a young guy's book because I think if you were even 10 years older, um, you would have looked at Dix and Sam with a remove
Hmm.
that's not there because you're part of the adventure now, because you're a young guy and these are young guys and this is an adventure. So I said, this is so, and I think it works particularly well because it moves and sweeps so quickly. And I think if you had written it 10 years older, it probably wouldn't have moved so quickly and so swiftly. But you might have looked at Dix and Sam a little differently
Hmm.
because how old were you when you wrote that?
I wrote it when I would have been 28,
Okay.
27, somewhere
So
around there.
so so 28, you're like, yeah, I'm gonna put my life in danger.
Yes.
38, like, that's probably a mistake. And 48, it's like, what are you crazy? And 50, it's like, so yeah, like so I don't reread my books.
Mm.
Uh, 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 Mainly because I'm prolific and I don't have time.
That,
And I, I don't reread them simply because I don't want to be disappointed.
mm.
You finish a book and
And you've
you
read it a
say
lot in the writing process and
you
the
read it a
editing
lot in the writing
process.
process, and you're thinking, well, and you have, and you're a writer, so you know this. When you finish a book, you have an idea of what it is in your head. Like, I wrote this book, and this is what it is. Oh my God, I look like Patrick McGowan. Um, Patrick McGowan. My God, look at this. um, so the, uh, the you have this idea of what the book is in your head, and you don't want to change that. And I haven't revisited any of my books simply because I don't want to disillusion myself.
Hmm. Honestly, that's fair because I remember there's a meme I saw that was like, write the book you want to read because you're going to read it a lot in the editing process over and
Yeah.
over and over again. And honestly, at this point, like, I occasionally go back and like turn a page and go, oh, I really like that sentence because someone told me they were on this chapter. So I'm like, oh, what happens there? And I'm like, oh, did I write that? I didn't think that I wrote that, but apparently I did. Um, because there's also that part where I just want to keep moving on to the next thing. Like
Uh,
as much fun as it is to go, oh, I enjoy having written. I want to have written more things, so I need to keep writing more. You, as a prolific author, I'm so desperately curious to hear. Do you have a writing process? Do you have a writing routine? What is it that helps you maintain this level of writing?
it's a job. No, it's a job. So if you sit there waiting for creativity to sort of settle on you like dew fall, you'll never write a word. And if you sit there waiting for it to be perfect and for you to be sober and not hungover, that's never going to happen. So uh, I write the way I keep office hours. When I get up in the morning, and I go to my desk at 9, and it depends on the book. So
Hmm.
some books you say I have whatever my word count for that day is,
Hmm.
and when I finish that word count, then I'm done for the day. If I'm finished at 2, then my day is done. If I'm finished at 7 at night, then my day is done. But it's the word count. So you have to hit a set number of words. When you're writing series novels, for example, Lucas Wheeler is Target's West, and Lucas Wheeler is a little different because I think of them as straight novels that happen to be a
Hmm.
series.
Hmm.
Um, but when you're writing series westerns, you're kind of writing them to formula, like Lester Dent or Walter Gibson, and you're like, well,
Hmm.
okay, I know exactly what I'm doing here. So you have to write to the formula and a certain number of words a day. And if you it, and that's what being a professional is.
Hmm.
Noel Coward once said that being a professional was being able to do it without they're being in the mood or being inspired or having all of the electrons synapses connecting at that moment. It is a job, and I think people have this wildly romanticized vision of what it means to be a writer. But really, it's a job and it's a lot of work. The big problem with being prolific is that, especially if you don't reread your stuff, is that you're worried that you're going to repeat yourself.
Mm.
So it's always good to have other people, a cadre of readers who
Yes.
go, you did that already. So I'm fortunately my better half reads everything I write and tells me I'm crazy. So or tells me that I've done this already or something.
I have found one of the number one things that's come up more repeatedly within the last year and a half or so on the podcast and just in conversations with other writers is creativity isn't a vacuum. And having those extra voices, once you get like the established like creativity set, people that can speak to the story, editors. I read a fantastic book on Maxwell Perkins, the editor of Fitzgerald. People on the show are going to get
Says Van
tired of
Dyne.
hearing me referring to him just because it was so amazing. Max Perkins, editor of Genius by Scott A. Berg, such a good book. And it gave me a whole new perspective on what that editing process can do to a story, where it makes it a story can be good and editing you can make it great just by making a few tweaks sometimes. Like the famous thing with Fitzgerald was I can't remember if it was Great Gatsby or one of his first books. No, it was Ernest Hemingway. Fitzgerald suggested cut the first chapter, the first 3 chapters. And The Sun Also Rises benefits from him having just wholesale sliced off those first 3 chapters.
Okay. I had a great editor on Target's West, a guy named David Bukowski.
Hmm.
Great editor, terrific guy, great mind. He made it exponentially better. The ending was entirely different, and he
Oh,
said
really?
that ending doesn't work. So I had to go back and rethink it. I mean, he didn't tell me what to do, but he said,
Hmm.
that doesn't work.
Yeah.
So then you sit back. But creativity is such a weird animal. I
Hmm.
mean, how would you define it? Like, what is creativity?
Lucid hallucination.
Oh wow! Wait a minute, I want to steal that. Lucid hallucination. Okay, okay. I would say creativity is a personal synthesis of everything that you've had.
I like that.
Yeah. Um, because all of my books have parts of me in it,
Hmm.
and not only parts of me, but parts of things that I've culturally consumed.
Hmm.
And I've been an avid, a rabid reader since I was in fifth grade. No, since I was five in fifth grade, and I love movies, and
Hmm.
I've written about movies for years. And there are some movies where I could lie down and see them played on the back of my eyeballs. Um, and all of that sort of seeps into your psyche, and that's food for your creativity. And it's not
Hmm.
a question of copying it, but it's a question of synthesizing it through you and making something out of it. And I would say that for me, that's what creativity is. But it's such a weird thing,
Hmm.
isn't it? I mean, you never know. I mean, so I'm sure when you've written your books, things have taken you by surprise, right?
Hmm.
So in Target's West, there's a character named Stan.
Yes, so much fun, by the way. Stan
Right.
is a standout character in the novel.
So when I first thought of Stan, that scene in Central Park, that was it. And he was going to leave
Hmm.
because I did not think that he was necessary to the book or anything. Um, and then when I was done with that, I said, this kid is just too good to leave there. And oddly enough, when I was sharing the manuscript with friends, even before I started thinking about sending it to potential publishers, everyone said, it's a good book, but boy, I love Stan. and and I so Stan is in the second book. Of course, he's a key player in the second book, and he wasn't there. I mean, I
Hmm.
thought the whole book was going to be Lucas and Pell,
Hmm.
and in my mind, the rift was going to be, this is the cowboy hero and his sidekick. So
Hmm.
it's Randolph Scott and Gabby Hayes in the
Yeah.
spy novel, but the kid was much more interesting to me than Pell, even though Pell
Hmm.
is very sweet. So
And
that's how
honestly, I
that
think
happened.
the relationship that Stan and Pell end up having
Yeah,
also like just does a great job of deepening the dynamic between the three characters.
yeah, because Pell actually helps Lucas take Stan under his wing, but then they're kind of jealous of each other.
Yes.
Lucas likes me better. No, he likes me better. But so yeah,
Which sounds like every friendship that really is, where it's like the
yeah.
argument, oh no, I'm his best friend. No, I'm his best
No,
friend.
I'm his best friend. Yes, we actually have this argument about the dog. I am convinced. I'm convinced that the dog loves my husband more than he loves me,
Hmm.
and my husband's convinced the dog loves him more than he loves me. But no, so we have this tiny little 5 pound dog. He's 5 pounds, 5 pounds of man-eating fury. I mean, and he's a mini Chihuahua,
Hmm.
and a Chihuahua and a mini Husky. So
Oh, interesting.
he looks like a 5 pound Husky. And we lived in New York, and I always wanted a dog. I always wanted a dog. And I would say, let's get a dog. And my husband would say, we live in a New York apartment. We're not going to get it.
Yeah.
And when we moved to California, we were here for a year. And I said, we've been here for a year and I want a dog. And he said, well, we're not ready yet. And I said, let's go to a shelter
Hmm.
and we'll look at them and we'll just see how hard the process is.
Hmm.
Always scheming, right?
Yes.
So we go, and the shelter is this huge expanse in the back where they have dogs in separate cages. And it's outdoors because it's California and it's never raining and it's never cold.
Hmm.
And Russell thought that he would like a big dog, like a big 50-pound dog that we could throw frisbees with and stuff like that. And I was indifferent as long as it was
Hmm.
a little dog and it loved me.
Hmm.
And the deal was you walk through it and you point to a dog and you point to a dog and they would bring them out one at a time. And as we were passing, there was this little tiny dog all by himself. And he walked up to the edge of the cage. And I said, like, oh, and him too. So they would bring out dog after dog. It's a very boring story, I'm sorry. And we would walk them and they were all very nice.
Hmm.
And then this little dog, 5 pounds, looks like a husky, comes out And he puts his forepaws on the tip of my shoe and looks up at me like this. And I said, "You little bastard." So we took him for a walk. And, at this point, my husband's getting tired. So he would stop and wait until we all were together, you know. So we brought him back and we're driving back. And I said, I know we're not ready for a dog. And I know you want a big dog, but that little dog is kind of nice. He said, "Yeah, but we're not ready." And that was on a Sunday. On Tuesday, I said, I was thinking about that little dog. And by Thursday, I said, here's what I think we should do. Let's go back to the shelter and we'll see that little dog and we'll realize that's not the dog for us.
Hmm.
So we're driving in on Saturday and he's driving and my cell phone rings and it's the shelter and they say, "The dog is ready, just come and get him." And I'm like, and Russell said, "Well, I knew you wanted that dog, so I just adopted him." So,
Aww.
so that's how we got a dog. So yes, but I don't even know how we got on this. Oh, yes, friendships. So
Friendships.
every now and then I look at my dog and I say, "You are here thanks to me." And my dog says, "Yeah, but I like him better." So
Oh, that's fantastic. Scott, this has been a delightful conversation. I'm really excited about Targets West. When does it come out? Where can people find it?
comes out on March 10th, and it's available on Amazon and on order through Barnes and Noble. And I'm doing a couple of book signings here in Southern California, which I'm looking forward to. And I hope you like it. I'm already revising the sequel,
Yes.
which is called Prosecution League. Uh,
Ooh.
and I wanted the sequel to have the same sort of sense of urgency and fun. So I would
Hmm.
let you know that it opens at Fort Sumter. This is a contemporary thriller. Opens at Fort Sumter, moves to Silo, and ends at the Alamo.
Ooh, I'm excited. See,
Ah,
that's the right way to tease readers, audience. Scott's an expert at this.
thank you.
Where can people go to learn more about you and your work in general?
First off, please follow me on Twitter or X or whatever it's called right now
Hmm.
at Scott McCrea West, where you can hear me talk about things that I know nothing about, but I do it anyway. And my website is scottmccrea.net.
Hmm. And I will link all of that in the show notes. Scott, thanks again for coming on the show.
So let me tell you that I've been watching your podcast for
Oh,
some
thank
time.
you.
So, this is a great pleasure for me. And I think you're a terrific
Hey, I appreciate it.
guy.
Enjoy.
I